That was the Revolutionary Etude by Frédéric Chopin from the Opus 10 set, number 12 in C minor. And as usual, I'm going to talk about the difficulties of the piece, how I practiced it, and whether I think it's a great etude. I know this is a more famous etude. I mean, all the Chopin etudes are pretty famous, but even among the Chopin etudes, the Revolutionary is often played. And maybe we can start off with that in terms of difficulties. I think that's a reason that more people play it. But anyway, let's get into it. So I kind of alluded that I wanted to start with the difficulty of the piece because I think that factors into why this is such a famous work. I hesitate to say that this is an easier Chopin etude, but in some sense it is. I think what I'll say is that it's a more approachable Chopin etude. There are etudes like the last one I talked about, Opus 10 number 2, where just playing the notes and surviving the etude is an achievement. And that's not even factoring in, playing it musically and with phrasing and understanding the piece. Forget about that. Just surviving 10-2 or 25-6 or 25-11 or a bunch of Chopin etudes that are the most difficult ones. It's difficult. Revolutionary is not like that. Revolutionary, I think this was the second Chopin etude I learned after Opus 10 number 9, and it's definitely one of the more approachable ones in the sense that one can play the notes fairly easily compared to some of the other studies. But I think to raise this etude from the level of student to professional or beyond student, that's where the difficulty lies. It's not an easy etude, and I learned that the hard way today. I've practiced a lot this past week and a half on Godowsky etudes, and my hands are super tired out because Godowsky's insane, and I've overpracticed. But in my mind, I was thinking, Chopin Revolutionary, this is an easier etude. I can go in there. I can play it fine. And as you probably heard in the recording, it was not fine. I'll throw in some bloopers and the frustrations I had because it was pretty sloppy. To get it to sound good and high level is difficult, but it is an easier Chopin etude from a can I just survive the etude point of view. So what are the difficulties? Clearly the left hand, people definitely think of this as a left-hand etude because the left hand plays 16th notes basically nonstop throughout. And in the right hand, there's some quick octaves, so you need, loose wrist octave technique, and then there's some jumps. Those are difficult. But in general, the etude's difficulties are in the left hand. Is it an effective etude? I think this is. Any etude especially in the Chopin etudes, there's not a lot of etudes that focus on the left hand. There's this one. And then you could make the argument that 25-4 and 10-9, there's some left-hand passages. But in general, this is really, I think, the only left-hand etude in the Chopin etudes. And it's very effective for building strength and stamina in the left hand. So great etude to learn, approachable etude to learn in the sense that if you're picking a first Chopin etude or second Chopin etude, this is a great choice. Just know that getting it to a very high standard of performance is difficult, as with all pieces. Okay, so as with any piece that has running left-hand notes, rhythms are going to be your best friend. And then groupings. Etc. And that's basically going to get you through most of the left-hand difficulties. There are a few special passages that I'll address, though, right now. Firstly, this business. This is measure 25. And this is different from the rest of the passages because this is less finger technique. A lot of the other stuff I think you're going to be using primarily finger technique for a nice clear sound. Right? I'm not going to be using my arm or wrist on. I mean, that's not going to work. You might be able to use the wrist to throw things. But in general, I think finger technique works the best for most of the left-hand passage. Meaning, really, you're keeping the hand still apart from the fingers. I think that works great, except for this passage here. And for that, you definitely need to have a little bit of wrist looseness. I treat this almost like a jump. I think I've talked before about how when we play jumps, we calculate the arc of the jump. Similar here. That's the jump, and Chopin is nice enough to provide actually the middle part of it. So I'm really focused on the middle part, and then jumping from those notes. So I guess my practice method there is that I really focus on the jump from the B flat to wherever the outer note is. And that's basically that section. And for the rest, the left hand really, rhythms and groupings are going to be your best friend. It's fairly simple. We could talk specifically about measure 15. These kind of long arpeggios, you practice it like chords. I almost played a wrong note, but yeah, that's how I practice it. So you break it up into chords. Just to memorize the hand position, and then you simply have to transition between those hand positions. And that should be fine. Now, the right hand, we just need to make sure that we're not using finger technique. The right hand, we're using a lot of wrist and arm. Especially on those quickly repeated octaves. I'm using a lot of wrist. And I use those moments where Chopin has an encore tone or an accent to push forward and release my wrist. All right, that's where I'm releasing. And then down. And that's basically the right hand. I mean, there are some jumps. I mean, you practice that by the arc. Arc. But for the most part, the technique is just going to be keeping that wrist loose for those quick octaves. Especially, I think, the quickest octave passage. The only way to think about that is not to think about individual octaves. I'm thinking of one large motion, kind of this one large to the right and forward motion, and then I pick up the notes in between. So all those middle notes are, when I say picked up, I really just mean I play them as my hand travels in the one motion. I'm not thinking down, 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 down on each octave. And that should solve most of the right hand problems. So the most difficult passage in the piece that's measure 29. Because the left hand is really quite tricky there. And I think it's tricky because it's using a lot of 4 and 5 in the left hand. So you just have to practice slowly with rhythms. There's no other shortcut there. I did a lot of chord practice as well. I don't know if that really helped, but it did certainly help me memorize the piece. And then I think that's about it for this etude. So it's pretty straightforward, right? It's a pretty straightforward etude. That's why I think it's so approachable and such a great etude to learn. Main principles then, lots of rhythms, groupings in the left hand. And for the most part, you're using finger technique, except for those moments where one needs to think of the left hand almost like it's jumping, right? And find so I guess I'm talking about measure 25. That's not a finger technique. That's kind of a wrist jump, almost jumping technique. And yeah, and then measures 15, measures like 15, that's also like a jumping technique where you're thinking about positional chords. And then maybe less about fingers. Any arpeggio we like to roll, That's much better than... So whenever you have the opportunity to loosen the wrist, we should take that because the stamina required throughout the piece is rather high. And in the right hand, lots of loose wrist and choreograph the larger motions, especially on fast octave passages. We're not micromanaging each downward motion on an octave. We're thinking about large arcs and picking up the middle notes. So that's about it for this etude. Pretty short and sweet. Once again, it's a great etude to learn. It's very approachable as a Chopin etude. To really polish it and get it to that higher level will take time, and certainly don't emulate my performance that way. There's some really great ones on YouTube. I'll probably re-record this and have a better take. But otherwise, that's about it, and I will see you next week. Another etude. There's a lot of juicy, difficult etudes coming up, so we'll see if I survive that. But otherwise, thanks for watching.